The sky above New York City darkened unnaturally as massive metallic shapes descended from the heavens. Towering alien ships, each larger than a skyscraper, blotted out the sun, casting long shadows over the bustling streets below. People stopped in their tracks, staring upward with a mix of awe and terror. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and distant car alarms triggered by the electromagnetic interference. Inside a dimly lit underground bunker beneath Washington, D.C., Dr. Elena Vega leaned closer to her computer screen. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she analyzed data streaming in from satellites tracking the invaders. She was one of the few scientists still working at the facility after most had been evacuated. On the monitor, lines of code and energy readings flickered rapidly. Something about the aliens' technology felt off. "They're broadcasting," said Marcus, her assistant, his voice trembling slightly. He adjusted the radio receiver on the desk, filling the room with a deep, guttural voice, speaking in an unfamiliar language. Then came a translation. A robotic voice overlaid the original message. "Surrender or be annihilated." Elena clenched her jaw. Surrender wasn't an option. Not for humanity. But how could they fight back? These beings, calling themselves the Vorthak Dominion, were clearly advanced far beyond anything Earth had ever encountered. Their ships shimmered with an impenetrable energy shield, deflecting every missile launched so far. Reports poured in from around the globe. Entire cities already under siege, military forces overwhelmed within minutes. "What do we know about them?" Marcus asked, pacing nervously. "Not enough," Elena muttered, scrolling through pages of fragmented intel. "But look here." She pointed to a cluster of strange energy spikes on the graph. "Their shields pulse intermittently. It's subtle, but it's there. If we can figure out the pattern." Her words trailed off as another report flashed across her screen. The live feed showed scenes of destruction, a Vorthak ground assault unit leveling buildings in Tokyo, civilians fleeing in chaos. For a moment, Elena froze, her heart sinking. Was this really happening? Had humanity's time run out before they even realized what hit them? Then something caught her eye. Buried in the raw telemetry data, she noticed a recurring frequency embedded in the Vorthak transmissions. It wasn't random noise. It was a signal repeated over and over. Narrowing her focus, she isolated the pattern and ran it through decryption algorithms. Minutes ticked by like hours until finally, the program spat out a result. "It's a command structure," Elena whispered, her eyes widening. "Everything. The shields, the weapons, the ships. They're all linked to one central source." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the findings. "You mean, like a single power core controlling everything?" "Yes," Elena replied, her mind racing. "If we can disable that core, we might take down the entire fleet." "But how?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Even if you're right, getting close to their mothership would be suicide." Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the glowing map on the wall, where red dots marked the locations of Vorthak ships, hovering menacingly over major cities. Somewhere among those dots was the key to humanity's survival, and its greatest challenge yet. Outside, the hum of alien engines grew louder, shaking the ground faintly. Time was running out. The world had never felt so small. Panic rippled across continents as the Vorthak Dominion tightened its grip on Earth. In New York City, former Marine Captain Jonah Reed stood atop a crumbling rooftop, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Below him, streets once alive with honking cars and bustling pedestrians were now eerily silent, save for the occasional scream echoing in the distance. The invaders' scout ships patrolled like vultures, their sleek metallic forms glinting under the pale sunlight that managed to filter through the haze of smoke and debris. Jonah lowered the binoculars and turned to face the group of civilians huddled behind him. They weren't soldiers, just ordinary people desperate to survive. There was Mia, a nurse clutching a first aid kit. Raj, a mechanic holding a wrench like it could ward off an alien attack. and Scifi, a teenager whose hands trembled as she loaded bullets into a revolver scavenged from an abandoned police station. "We can't just sit here," Jonah said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "If we don't fight back, they'll wipe us out." "But how?" Maya asked, her voice shaking. "Look at what they did to the army. Tanks, planes, missiles, none of it worked." Jonah clenched his fists. She wasn't wrong. Every military strike launched against the Vorthak ended in failure. Their shields were impenetrable, their weapons devastating. But giving up wasn't an option. Not for him, not for anyone. "We hit them where they least expect it," he replied. "Small teams, quick strikes, hit and run tactics. We may not have their tech, but we got something they don't. Home field advantage." His words sparked a flicker of hope in the group. Slowly, they began nodding, determination replacing fear in their eyes. Over the next few hours, Jonah organized them into squads, teaching basic combat skills and assigning roles based on their strengths. By nightfall, they had transformed an old warehouse into a makeshift command center, complete with maps marked with potential targets. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, Dr. Elena Vega worked tirelessly in her underground lab. Her discovery about the Vorthak's centralized power source consumed her every thought. If her theory was correct, humanity still had a chance, but only if someone could reach the mothership. That someone would need more than courage. They'd need intelligence, strategy, and maybe a miracle. Elena's phone buzzed, pulling her attention away from the glowing screen. It was a video call from General Harris, one of the few high-ranking officers still active. His face appeared on the monitor, lined with exhaustion. "Dr. Vega," he began, his tone grave. "We've tried everything. Nuclear warheads, EMP bursts, nothing works. What you're suggesting, is it even possible?" "It has to be," Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. "Their entire fleet relies on that core. Take it out, and they fall." General Harris sighed heavily. "Then tell me what you need. Whatever resources are left, they're yours." Back in New York, Jonah's militia prepared for their first mission, an assault on a grounded Vorthak scout ship in Chicago. Intelligence suggested the vessel was lightly guarded, making it a prime target for sabotage. If successful, they might capture valuable technology or gather intel that could turn the tide. As the team packed supplies and checked weapons, Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The odds were stacked against them, but deep down, he believed in the resilience of humanity. People always found a way to rise when pushed to the brink. By dawn, the militia set out, their resolve hardened by desperation. Somewhere far away, Elena watched another data stream roll in, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Together, though separated by miles and circumstances, they shared the same goal: survival. And perhaps, just maybe, victory. The wind howled through the desolate streets of Chicago as Jonah Reed and his team crept toward their target, a grounded Vorthak scout ship. Its sleek, obsidian surface gleamed faintly under the moonlight, looking more like a predator lying in wait than a machine. The city around it was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of collapsing buildings or distant hum of alien patrols overhead. Jonah signaled for the group to stop at the edge of an alleyway. They were close enough now to see the two Vorthak sentries guarding the ship. Tall and insectoid, their armored bodies shimmered faintly with energy fields that pulsed rhythmically, making them look almost otherworldly. Each carried a weapon that glowed ominously, ready to unleash destruction at a moment's notice. "Remember the plan," Jonah whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Mia, Raj, create a diversion on the west side. Scifi and I will move in from the east while they're distracted." The group nodded, their faces tense but resolute. Mia and Raj slipped away silently, heading toward the designated spot. Moments later, the sound of shattering glass erupted several blocks away, followed by blinding flashes from makeshift explosives rigged with flares. The Vorthak sentries turned sharply, their weapons raised as they moved to investigate the disturbance. "This is it," Jonah murmured to Scifi, gripping his rifle tightly. "Stay low and keep moving." They darted across the open street, sticking to the shadows cast by ruined cars and debris. As they approached the scout ship, Jonah spotted a small access hatch near its base. It was partially concealed, likely used for maintenance or emergencies. He motioned for Scifi to cover him while he worked on prying it open. Inside the hatch, wires and glowing conduits pulsed with alien energy. Jonah hesitated, unsure which ones to cut. "Scifi, hand me the scanner," he said, his voice urgent. She quickly passed him a handheld device salvaged from Elena's lab earlier. After scanning the circuits, the device beeped softly, highlighting a cluster of wires marked in red. "Cut those," Jonah instructed. Scifi nodded, pulling out a pair of pliers. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself before snipping the wires cleanly. The ship emitted a low whine, and the pulsing lights dimmed momentarily. "We've got what we came for," Jonah exclaimed quietly, stuffing a piece of alien tech into his backpack. But their victory was short-lived. A sudden burst of static crackled through the air, followed by an ear-splitting screech. The Vorthak had returned, alerted by the disruption. "Incoming," Scifi shouted, raising her revolver. Jonah fired first, aiming for one of the sentries. His bullet ricocheted harmlessly off its energy shield, but the shot drew its attention. The creature unleashed a searing beam of light that tore through the ground where Jonah had been standing moments before. He rolled behind a pile of rubble, heart pounding. "Fall back," he yelled, knowing they couldn't win this fight. As the team regrouped and retreated into the labyrinth of abandoned buildings, the Vorthak unleashed retaliatory blasts, reducing entire structures to rubble. Despite the chaos, they managed to escape with minimal casualties. And the stolen tech. Back at their hideout, Jonah laid the alien artifact on the table, its faint glow illuminating the room. Everyone gathered around, exhaustion giving way to cautious optimism. "This could be our ticket," Jonah said, his voice tinged with determination. "If Dr. Vega can figure out how it works, we might have a real shot at taking these bastards down." Unbeknownst to them, the theft hadn't gone unnoticed. On board the Vorthak mothership, General Kalthar watched footage of the raid, his mandibles clicking in fury. Humanity's defiance infuriated him. To conquer Earth, he would need to crush not just their armies, but their spirit. And so the war entered a new phase, one marked by escalating stakes and mounting desperation. For both sides, there would be no turning back. The stolen alien artifact sat on a makeshift workbench in Dr. Elena Vega's underground lab, its faint glow casting eerie shadows across the room. Around her, monitors displayed streams of data as she analyzed the device, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Hours had passed since Jonah's team delivered it, and though exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, she couldn't afford to rest. Every second counted. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, leaning over her shoulder. His voice was tentative, tinged with both curiosity and fear. "It's fascinating," Elena replied, her tone distant but focused. "This thing isn't just a weapon, it's part of their communication system. If we can reverse engineer it, we might be able to tap into their network." Before Marcus could respond, the room's emergency alert system blared to life. A shrill, high-pitched sound that made them both flinch. On one of the screens, a new signal appeared, overriding all other transmissions. A distorted image flickered to life, revealing an alien face unlike any they'd seen before. This Vorthak was smaller, thinner, with delicate features that seemed almost fragile compared to the hulking soldiers depicted in earlier broadcasts. "I am Zenara," the figure said in halting but understandable English. "I seek asylum among your kind." Elena froze, her heart racing. "Asylum? From a Vorthak?" She glanced at Marcus, who looked equally stunned. "Why should we trust you?" Elena demanded, stepping closer to the monitor. "I oppose this invasion. Zenara replied, her voice calm but firm. Many of my people believe conquering Earth is unnecessary slaughter. General Kalthar ignores dissenters, and those who speak out vanish. I can help you defeat him, but only if you protect me. For a moment, silence filled the lab. The weight of the decision pressed down on Alina. Trusting an alien, even one claiming to defect, was risky. But if Zenara was telling the truth, she could provide invaluable intel about the Vorthak's weaknesses. We need proof, Alina said finally. Something concrete to show you're not lying. Zenara nodded, as if expecting the demand. Access code Delta 749, she said. Input it into the artifact you recovered. It will unlock restricted files detailing the mothership's defenses. Alina hesitated, then typed the sequence into the console connected to the alien device. To her astonishment, the artifact hummed to life, projecting holographic schematics onto the wall. Detailed diagrams of the mothership's power core appeared, along with notes written in what appeared to be technical jargon. She's legit, Marcus whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Fine, Alina said, turning back to the screen. We'll offer you protection. But know this, if you betray us, humanity won't hesitate to destroy you too. Zenara bowed her head slightly. Understood. Now, listen carefully. Time is short. Over the next hour, Zenara explained everything she knew. The Vorthak fleet relied entirely on a single centralized power source housed within the mothership. Disabling it would cripple their entire operation, but reaching it wouldn't be easy. Layers of automated defenses guarded the core, and General Kalthar kept a personal squadron stationed nearby at all times. There may be another way, Zenara added hesitantly. A maintenance tunnel runs directly beneath the core chamber. Few know of its existence. It was designed for emergencies. Alina exchanged a glance with Marcus. This was more than they'd hoped for. With Zenara's help, their chances of success skyrocketed. But convincing others wouldn't be so simple. When Alina contacted General Harris to share the plan, he balked. You want me to trust a Vorthak? After everything they've done? It's our best shot, Alina insisted. Without her intel, we're walking blind into a suicide mission. Reluctantly, Harris agreed, authorizing a covered extraction team to retrieve Zenara from her hiding place aboard a smaller Vorthak cruiser orbiting Earth. As the operation unfolded, Jonah and his militia prepared for their role in the larger assault. They didn't fully trust Zenara either, but desperation left little room for doubt. In the end, survival meant taking risks, and sometimes allies came from the unlikeliest places. The news of Zenara's defection spread quickly among the resistance, though not everyone welcomed it with open arms. In a dimly lit warehouse-turned-command center on the outskirts of Chicago, tensions simmered as Jonah Reed paced back and forth in front of his team. Maps, blueprints, and hastily scribbled notes covered the walls, but the mood was far from optimistic. We're putting our lives in the hands of one of them. Raj spat, pointing angrily at the holographic schematics Zenara had provided. How do we know this isn't some trick? Maybe she's leading us into a trap. Jonah stopped pacing and turned to face him, his expression hardening. And what's your plan, Raj? Keep running and hiding until they burn the planet to ash. We don't have time to second-guess every move. But trusting a Vorthak, Raj started, only to be cut off by Mia. She gave us intel that checks out, Maya said firmly, her voice steady despite the fatigue etched on her face. Dr. Vega verified it. If we don't act now, we'll lose any chance we have left. Sophie, who had been quietly observing the argument, finally spoke up. She's risking her life too, you know. If the Vorthak find out she helped us, her voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Raj grumbled under his breath, but didn't argue further. He wasn't convinced, but he also knew they couldn't afford to waste energy fighting among themselves. Meanwhile, miles away in her underground lab, Alina worked tirelessly alongside Zenara, who had been successfully extracted from the Vorthak cruiser. Though grateful for asylum, Zenera remained cautious, her movements deliberate and measured. She spent hours explaining the intricacies of Vorthak technology, helping Elena refine the prototype EMP device designed to disable their defenses. This frequency will disrupt their shields temporarily, Zenera explained, adjusting a dial on the console. But it won't last long, perhaps 30 seconds at most. You must act quickly once it's deployed. Elena nodded, jotting down notes. Despite Zenera's cooperation, she couldn't shake the lingering unease gnawing at her gut. What if this was all part of a larger scheme? Yet, deep down, she trusted her instincts and her calculations. The data checked out. For now, that would have to be enough. Back in Chicago, Jonah pushed his team harder than ever, drilling them on guerrilla tactics and coordination. They practiced ambushes, sabotage missions, and escape routes until exhaustion blurred their vision. But morale began to rise as small victories accumulated. A successful raid on a supply convoy here, a disabled Vorthak patrol drone there. Each triumph fueled their hope, no matter how fleeting. One evening, after another grueling training session, Jonah sat alone on the rooftop of the warehouse, staring at the alien ships hovering ominously in the distance. His mind raced with doubts and fears. Could they really pull this off? Even with Zenera's intel and Elena's ingenuity, the odds still felt insurmountable. Can't sleep either? Scifi asked, joining him unexpectedly. She held 2 cups of lukewarm coffee, offering one to them. Jonah accepted it with a nod. Too much to think about. You're worried, she said softly. It wasn't a question. Of course I am, he admitted. Every decision we make could get people killed. And Zenera, I don't like relying on someone who might turn on us. Sophie sipped her coffee thoughtfully. I get it. But sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Isn't that what leadership is about? Knowing when to trust, even when it's scary. Her words struck a chord. Jonah exhaled slowly, watching the steam rise from his cup. Leadership wasn't just about making tough calls. It was about inspiring others to believe, even when belief seemed impossible. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jonah made a silent vow. No matter what happened next, he would see this through, for Earth, for humanity, and for those who dared to hope against all odds. The resistance was growing stronger, united by desperation and determination. But little did they know, betrayal lurked closer than anyone suspected. The resistance was buzzing with activity as preparations for the final assault reached their peak. Inside the Chicago warehouse, maps were spread across tables, marked with routes and targets. Weapons were cleaned and checked, supplies inventoried, and every detail scrutinized. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. Jonah stood at the center of it all, barking orders while trying to keep morale high. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. We're fighting for everyone out there who can't fight back. But despite his efforts, cracks began to show within the team. Trust, already fragile, started to fray under the weight of uncertainty. Whispers circulated about Zenera's true intentions. Some, like Raj, remained openly skeptical, questioning whether her intel could be trusted. Others simply grew restless, their nerves frayed by days of relentless preparation. Late one night, as most of the group slept fitfully on cots scattered around the warehouse, Elena received an encrypted message from General Harris. Her heart sank as she read the contents. A mole had leaked critical details of the operation. The Vorthak now knew about the planned diversionary attacks, and worse, they suspected the infiltration team's ultimate goal. Elena immediately contacted Jonah. We've been compromised, she said over the secure line, her voice tight with urgency. Whoever did this fed the Vorthak everything. Our targets, our timing, even the EMP prototype. Jonah cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. Do we know who it is? Not yet, Elena admitted. But whoever it is has access to our communications. It has to be someone close to us. Jonah ended the call and stormed into the main room, waking the team. One by one, They gathered, groggy but alert, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Someone here betrayed us," Jonah announced bluntly, his eyes scanning the faces before him. Shock rippled through the group, followed by murmurs of disbelief. "It's her fault," Rad shouted, pointing accusingly at Sophie. "She's always sneaking off, talking to people outside the group. How do we know she hasn't been feeding them info?" Sophie's face flushed with anger. "Are you serious? I've risked my life for this cause, just like everyone else." "Enough," Jonah barked, silencing the argument. He turned to Mia. "Check the comms logs. See if anyone accessed classified files without authorization." Mia nodded and rushed to her laptop. Minutes later, she gasped. It's Dr. Patel," she said, her voice trembling. Dr. Patel, a scientist who had joined the resistance weeks earlier, had seemed harmless, a quiet man who kept to himself. But when confronted, his guilt was undeniable. Cornered, he confessed, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he stammered. "I thought surrendering would save lives. They promised they'd spare us if we cooperated." Jonah clenched his fists, fury boiling inside him. "You sold us out because you were scared. People are going to die because of you." Before anyone could stop him, Jonah drew his sidearm and aimed it at Dr. Patel. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of distant alien ships. "No," Elena's voice crackled over the radio. "We don't have time for revenge. We need to adapt, change the plan. If they think they've won, let's prove them wrong." Jonah hesitated, then lowered the gun. She was right. They couldn't afford distractions. Turning to the group, he spoke firmly. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll split into smaller teams, hit multiple targets simultaneously, confuse them, make them think the leak worked, but blindside them where it counts." As the team scrambled to adjust their strategy, Jonah couldn't shake the weight of betrayal. Sacrifices had been made, trust broken. Yet, amidst the chaos, one truth remained clear: giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. And so, with renewed determination, the resistance prepared to strike, not just for survival, but for justice, for Earth. The final mission began under the cover of darkness, with storm clouds rolling across the sky and lightning illuminating the jagged outlines of ruined cities. Jonah Reed led his infiltration team, a small, elite group consisting of himself, Elena Vega, Zenara, and 2 trusted militia members. Toward their rendezvous point, their stolen Vortex shuttle sat hidden in an abandoned industrial lot, its sleek metallic surface blending seamlessly with the wreckage around it. "Everyone ready?" Jonah asked, his voice low but firm. The weight of what they were about to attempt hung heavy in the air. Elena adjusted the EMP device strapped to her back, her hands trembling slightly. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, forcing a weak smile. Zenara stood silently, her expression unreadable behind her smooth alien features. She carried no weapons, only a small data pad filled with critical information about the mothership's layout. Despite her calm demeanor, there was an undeniable tension in her movements, a quiet fear that even she couldn't hide. The team boarded the shuttle, disguising themselves as prisoners escorted by Vorthak soldiers. Using forged ID tags and communication codes provided by Zenara, they navigated past several patrol ships without incident. As they approached the massive mothership looming ahead, its sheer size made their vessel feel like an insect crawling toward a predator. "This is it," Elena whispered, gripping the edge of her seat. Once docked, the team disembarked cautiously, sticking close to the shadows along the ship's corridors. The interior was eerily silent, illuminated by pulsating blue lights that cast strange reflections on the walls. Automated defense systems scanned periodically, forcing them to freeze whenever a beam passed too close. "Stay sharp," Jonah muttered, his rifle at the ready. "We're not out of the woods yet." Zenara guided them through winding passages, occasionally stopping to consult her datapad. "The maintenance tunnel is just ahead," she said finally, pointing to a narrow hatch embedded in the floor. "But we'll need to disable the security lock first." Alina knelt beside the hatch, pulling out a handheld hacking tool. Her fingers flew over the controls as lines of code scrolled across the screen. Seconds felt like hours until the lock clicked open, revealing the dimly lit tunnel below. "Let's move," Jonah urged, motioning for the others to follow. As they descended into the cramped space, the hum of machinery grew louder, vibrating through the walls. The tunnel was tight and claustrophobic, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees at times. Sweat dripped down Alina's forehead as she struggled to keep up, the weight of the EMP device pressing against her shoulders. Halfway through, Zenera paused abruptly, her antennae-like sensors twitching. "Something's wrong," she murmured. "I sense movement." Before anyone could react, a loud clang echoed above them. A panel in the ceiling slid open, revealing a squad of Vorthek drones descending into the tunnel. Their glowing eyes locked onto the intruders instantly. "Go," Jonah shouted, firing blindly at the machines. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off their armored bodies, but it bought the team precious seconds to scramble forward. Behind them, one of the militia members tripped, crying out as a drone pinned him to the ground. Without hesitation, Zenera turned back, using her own body to shield the others. With a burst of energy, she overloaded the drone's circuits, sacrificing herself in the process. "No!" Alina screamed, reaching for her fallen ally, but Jonah grabbed her arm, pulling her onward. "We can't stop now," he yelled, his voice breaking. "She gave us this chance. We have to finish it." Tears streaming down her face, Alina nodded, forcing herself to keep moving. Ahead, the faint glow of the power core chamber beckoned, promising both salvation and destruction. Every step forward came at a cost, but retreat was no longer an option. The team emerged from the maintenance tunnel into a vast chamber, its walls lined with glowing conduits that pulsed rhythmically like veins pumping life through the mothership. At the center of the room stood the power core, a massive crystalline structure suspended within a lattice of energy fields. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly light, casting prismatic reflections across the space. The hum of raw energy filled the air, vibrating through their bodies and making it hard to think clearly. Alina froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. This was it, the heart of the Vorthek fleet. If they could disable this core, the entire invasion would collapse. But as she stared at the intricate web of defenses surrounding it, doubt crept in. Automated turrets were mounted along the walls, their barrels tracking movement silently. Red warning lights blinked steadily, signaling the presence of proximity sensors. And hovering above the core itself was a squad of Vorthek enforcers, their weapons trained on any potential threat. "We're running out of time," Jonah whispered harshly, snapping Alina back to reality. "What's the plan?" Alina took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "The EMP needs to be placed directly beneath the core," she explained, pointing to a narrow platform below it. "It'll disrupt the energy grid long enough for us to overload the system manually." "And then what?" one of the militia members asked nervously. "Then we run like hell," Jonah answered grimly. Zenera's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone's minds as they prepared to execute the plan. Her bravery had given them a fighting chance, but the cost of failure now felt unbearable. "Cover me," Alina said, gripping the EMP device tightly. She moved cautiously toward the platform, her footsteps muffled by the thick vibrations echoing through the chamber. Behind her, Jonah and the others fired sporadically at the enforcers, drawing their attention away from the core. As Alina reached the platform, she knelt down and began attaching the EMP to the base of the core. Her hands trembled as she connected wires and adjusted settings, each second stretching endlessly. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared, piercing through the low hum of energy. General Calthar's voice boomed over the intercom, cold and menacing. "Intruders detected. You will not succeed." The automated turrets came alive, swiveling toward Alina. Bullets ricocheted off the platform as she worked furiously to finish setting up the device. "Hurry," Jonah shouted, taking cover behind a pillar while returning fire. "I'm almost done," Elena yelled back, sweat dripping down her face. With a final adjustment, the EMP activated, emitting a high-pitched whine that drowned out the chaos around them. For a brief moment, everything went still. The core's glow dimmed slightly, and the turrets powered down. "Now," Elena screamed, scrambling to her feet. Jonah rushed to her side, grabbing her arm. "Let's go." But as they turned to retreat, the core flared back to life, brighter than before. The EMP's effect was temporary, just as Zenara had warned. "There's no way out," Elena realized, her voice trembling. Overloading the core required someone to stay behind and trigger the sequence manually. "No," Jonah said firmly, pulling her toward the exit. "We find another way." Elena stopped abruptly, tears streaming down her face. There is no other way. Someone has to do this. Before Jonah could argue further, General Calthar appeared on a nearby monitor, his expression smug. "Your resistance ends here, humans. Surrender or die." Elena locked eyes with Jonah, her resolve hardening. "Get out of here," she said softly. "Tell the others. Tell them we did everything we could." Jonah hesitated, torn between duty and emotion. Then, with a heavy heart, he nodded. "You don't have to do this alone." "Yes, I do," Elena replied, turning back to the core. As the rest of the team retreated, she input the final commands, knowing there would be no escape. The countdown began. Time was running out, for Elena, and for humanity. The countdown loomed over Elena like a death knell, its rhythmic beeping echoing through the chamber as she worked frantically at the core's control panel. Her fingers moved with precision, but her mind raced with emotions: fear, regret, determination. Each keystroke brought her closer to the inevitable. Outside the chamber, Jonah and the remaining militia members fought desperately to hold off waves of Vorthic reinforcements swarming toward them. The EMP's effects had worn off completely, and now every step forward was met with relentless resistance. Bullets ricocheted off walls, energy blasts tore through corridors, and the air was thick with smoke and screams. "Jonah, we can't keep this up," one of the militia shouted, ducking behind a crumbling pillar as a Vorthic enforcer fired another searing beam of light. "We don't have a choice," Jonah barked back, reloading his rifle. "Elena's buying us time. We can't let her down." But even as he spoke, doubt clawed at him. Was it worth sacrificing her life for this? Could humanity truly win if they survived? He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the fight ahead. Every second counted. Inside the chamber, Elena completed the final sequence. The core began to glow brighter, its energy surging uncontrollably. A deep rumble reverberated through the ship, shaking the ground beneath her feet. She knew there were only moments left before the overload consumed everything, including her. Her radio crackled to life. "Elena, get out of there." Jonah's voice came through, desperate and strained. "I can't," she replied calmly, her eyes fixed on the glowing core. "You know that." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Jonah's voice returned, quieter but resolute. "Then, thank you for everything." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she managed a small smile. "Take care of them, Jonah. Promise me." "I promise," he said, his voice breaking. As the core's hum grew deafening, Elena took one last look around the chamber. Images flashed through her mind. Her lab, her team, the countless lives depending on her sacrifice. She thought about Zenara, whose bravery had paved the way for this moment. And she thought about Earth, fragile yet resilient, worth every ounce of effort. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the corridor outside. Debris rained down, and the entrance to the chamber collapsed partially, blocking the path. Through the dust, Jonah appeared, battered but determined. "What are you doing here?" Elena demanded, her voice rising in panic. You need to leave." "No," Jonah said firmly, stepping closer. "Not without you. There's no time." Elena yelled, pointing at the rapidly destabilizing core. "If you stay, we both die." Jonah hesitated, torn between logic and loyalty. Then, with a sudden burst of clarity, he grabbed her arm. "We're not leaving anyone behind. Not today." Before Elena could protest further, he wrapped his arms around her and activated a grappling hook attached to his belt. With a sharp tug, they launched upward, through a ventilation shaft leading out of the chamber. The heat from the core singed their clothes as they ascended, the countdown reaching its final seconds. They barely made it outside before the mothership erupted in a blinding explosion, shaking the entire fleet. The shockwave sent their shuttle tumbling through space, but somehow they survived. As the debris settled and the alien ships began to fall from the sky, Jonah held Elena tightly, both of them gasping for breath. Against all odds, they had made it out alive, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on their hearts. Humanity had won, but nothing would ever be the same again. The sky above Earth was no longer darkened by alien ships. The once oppressive hum of Vorthak engines had been replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the distant cheers of survivors celebrating their improbable victory. Fires still burned in cities across the globe, and the scars of battle were etched deeply into the landscape. But humanity had endured. Against all odds, they had triumphed. Jonah Reed stood on a hill overlooking what remained of Chicago, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Beside him, Elena Vega leaned heavily on a walking stick, her face pale from exhaustion, but illuminated by a faint smile. They had made it back to Earth after narrowly escaping the exploding mothership, their shuttle crash-landing miles outside the city. Though battered and bruised, they were alive, a fact neither took for granted. "I never thought I'd see this again," Elena murmured, gazing at the horizon, where the sun peeked through the smoke-filled skies. "Earth, home." "It's not perfect," Jonah replied, his voice tinged with both relief and sorrow. "But it's ours, and we'll rebuild." News of the Vorthak defeat spread quickly, carried by radio signals and word of mouth. Refugees emerged from hiding, banding together to salvage what little remained. In every corner of the world, stories of resistance fighters like Jonah and Elena inspired hope. People who had lost everything found strength in unity, vowing to rise stronger than before. Back at the underground bunker, General Harris greeted the returning heroes with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "You did it," he said simply, shaking Jonah's hand firmly. "Against all odds, you saved us." Elena shook her head modestly. "We couldn't have done it without Sinara, or the countless others who gave everything for this fight." Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, remembering the sacrifices that had paved the way for their survival. In the days that followed, humanity began the painstaking process of rebuilding. Engineers studied fragments of Vorthak technology salvaged from the wreckage, seeking ways to adapt it for Earth's benefit. Scientists worked tirelessly to reverse engineer advancements that could prevent another invasion. Helena dedicated herself to leading these efforts, driven by a promise she had made to those who didn't survive, to ensure no alien force would ever threaten Earth again. But amidst the celebrations and reconstruction, a shadow lingered. Deep within the debris field orbiting Earth, a single piece of alien tech flickered faintly. Buried beneath twisted metal and shattered circuits, it emitted a faint signal, a quiet pulse that went unnoticed by even the most advanced human scanners. On board a distant outpost at the edge of the solar system, a dormant Vorthak beacon activated, transmitting coordinates back to the far reaches of space. Somewhere in the vastness of the universe, a new fleet stirred, alerted to the existence of a resilient species called humans. For now, peace reigned, but the universe always held secrets far beyond comprehension. As Jonah looked out over the ruined city one last time, he placed a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "we'll face it together." And though neither knew what the future held, they faced it with courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that humanity's greatest strength lay not in weapons or technology, but in its refusal to give up, no matter how dire the odds. A new dawn had arrived, but the stars still hid mysteries, and humanity's journey was far from over.